Hello everyone, welcome aboard. This is going to be lesson number 14 of Beginner's Java. This is Damien, and let's jump right in. So the last lesson that we did, we focused on arrays. And sorry if my keyboard is louder, I switched keyboards to a mechanical keyboard, and it is going to be a lot. So an array is a type of storage which holds multiple variables of the same type. Cool. So just as a generalized reminder, we take something like int my array equals new int 5. Something like that, and then we say actually, let's kind of pick up where we left off. Let's actually start with this as our code. And just for the record, so these little square brackets mean that something's going to be an array. Java lets you put them either after int or after myArray. In general, I see most people putting them after int, because the way that you would read this is I have an integer of arrays, not an integer of whatever you named the array, or an array of whatever you named it. But different companies may have it the other way around, so just a fair bit of warning. They're both totally valid. So one thing that I did in my last video was I showed you guys how to initialize an array by going and saying my array of 0 equals 1, and yada yada yada. So this 0 is known as the subscript. But you might be saying, that's really lame. Like if you have to go through and kind of do this, where you're declaring what each one of these is going to be, why don't you just use a bunch of variables? And so to that I would say you're correct. There would be no there we go. Sorry, still getting used to the new keyboard. But what if we wanted to initialize an array differently, right? So let's say I have a string, and we're going to call it numbers, and it's going to equal something like that, just some random numbers I keyed in. And let's do like this. So let's say we do int my numbers equals new, oh god, I keep forgetting the new int numbers dot length. Cool. And so this allows us to make an array of the length of characters in this string. So in this case, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 characters, which means that we're making an array which can hold 11 numbers. So if I wanted to get each one of these so that my array looked something like this, and I were to say it's 1 in the first, 2 in the second, 3, let me just comment this out so I don't screw myself up later, 5, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 1. Right? So if I wanted that as these 0, 1, 2, 3, yada 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 position of my array, there's a pretty quick way of doing it, right? So obviously we're going to want to take a for loop, because the goal is we're going to look at every single character in this array, and we're going to take it and we're going to change it from being a character, or in this case a number and not an integer, to and I put air quotes around that, and then turning it into an integer so it can fit into this little bucket that we have for it. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a for loop. So we'll start with I equals 0. I is less than numbers.length. I plus plus. And so what we know here is that if we do something like this, we do system.out.println numbers.char I, right? This is going to print this out one at a time on a new line. So it'll give us our numbers on kind of a new line once this finally builds. And so now we need to kind of, instead of printing them, we need to pop them into that array. So this is going to be a great example of you know, combining a bunch of statements into one thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do this out the long way. And we'll say int temp equals -1 or something like that. And so we're going to say temp equals numbers.char I. So obviously, when we run this, if we do system.out.println temp, historically speaking, this would not work. I think it actually does now that we're in yeah. Okay, so this gives us, this is actually a very interesting output, right? Because we got 49, 50, 51, but nowhere in this do we have the numbers 49, 50, 51. And in theory, prior to Java 10, I'm pretty sure this would have just broken. So if you install Java 8, this might not work for you. So let's go over what's actually happening. Let me bring up a Google Chrome window and bring up what's called the Ascii Table. So the Ascii Table is a numeric as well as hexadecimal representation for each value on a keyboard, right? So here we have all the stuff between space and tilde, which is the normal stuff. But if you look at the numbers, their decimal representation is between 48 for 0 and 57 for 9. So now when we look back, we see 49, right? And so if we were to bring that over here, you know, 49 is 1, 2 is 50, etc., etc. And we can clearly match up that that's exactly what we were expecting, right? It's giving us the integer representation of the character. But that's not what we want. We just want this, right? So what we need to do is we need to do, I want to say it's integer.parseInt, and I believe that we can do that with a character like that, right? We can't do it quite like that. Okay, so great. This actually becomes a bit more complicated if we can't do it this way, which is good. So let me think, right? Because there's a few different ways we can do this. So we can either start by taking these values and converting them, right? Or alternatively, we can, I believe that we can cast these. Remember a while ago I mentioned casting. I think we can do like this. And I think if we do that, that should give us what we're after. No? Okay, so that didn't give us what we were after. So, okay, there's 2 or 3 different ways to do this. I think one of them will give us a bit more practice, but let me see what I can do in character dot. I can do toString, but can I do? Yeah, so there's no toInt or anything like that, and it looks like when I try to take the integer dot parseInt, I can do it like that, but the moment I define a single character, it wants a string and not a single character. So now there's a few ways of doing this, as I've alluded to a few times. Now, the ways we can do this are we can either create a substring of the larger string equal to a string that is 1 character in size. So basically, if we add 1, 2, 3, 5, ... the first time through it would be 1, the second time through it would be 2, the third time through it would be 3, fourth time 5, ... through the entire string. Alternatively, we could take the decimal values and subtract, let's see, so I believe it was 48 was 0. So if we subtract 48, then we get their decimal value, or we get their integer value. So, like any good teacher, I'm going to show you both. Why not? So, the easier one, which is the decimal value route, looks just like this. So, if we were to say temp equals numbers dot char I minus 48, that's it. We're done. So we do that, and there's our string, and then if we so choose, we can then just say my numbers dot of I equals temp, right? And now for those of you saying, Damien, you can do all of that in 1 line of code rather than having multiple lines of code. You are correct. We most certainly can. We can instead say my numbers of I equals numbers dot char I minus 48. Right? So that's basically the same thing, we just didn't use the temp variable. So then, and by the way, this is going to be a code that you use an awful lot. So we're going to make a quick for loop. Int I equals 0. By the way, I'm able to redefine I because when I used I up here, it died at the end of the scope, so it's no longer a variable down here. I is less than my numbers dot length. I plus plus. Okay, so cool. We'll do system.out.println my numbers of I. And so when we do that, let's actually do like this. We'll print it out all on 1 line so we feel like we got the exact same thing, which as you can see, we did. So now, before we go back and do this idea of substringing, which isn't really necessary in this case, but I'm going to show you guys how to do it anyways, I want to back up and just show you guys. Actually, you know what? I'll make substring next video, but there is a quicker way to output all the values in an array. And so the quick way of doing that is you can make you know, I actually don't know the name of this. I think it's a value-bound for loop. So you can say for, you can say int s colon my numbers. And the s can be anything. It can be I, it can be q, it can be number, it can be, it's just a variable name. Right, so I'll leave it as number, and we'll just do system.out.println number. Oh, and I used print above. So, and as you can see, it saves us a little bit of effort. Now, you might be saying, well, if you have this, why would you ever want to do both? And the answer is, what if you have two arrays, right? This number only relates to your my numbers array. So if you have to print out 2 arrays, or maybe you have 5 arrays, and you need to print out the, you know, the person's first name, their order number, you know, whatever else, you need to go through each one of those at the same time. So this type of loop wouldn't work, whereas a counter-controlled loop would. So there are shortcomings to this, and there are ways around that, but generally speaking, when you're trying to output from multiple places at the same time, the counter-controlled loop is a bit easier. Alright, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Like, subscribe, share, send hugs and kisses, Patreon, blah blah blah. See ya!